Hello, I'm Ed Needham, editor of the fabulous literary magazine Strong Words, and this is my podcast, The 5 Rules of Writing. In each episode, I speak to a most excellent writer in a particular genre about how they do it. And if you'd like to know more about Strong Words, and specifically how to subscribe, go to www.strong-words.co.uk and you'll be whisked straight to the website. Hello and welcome to the 5 Rules of Writing, brought to you by Strong Words magazine. Now, this is a podcast where I talk to writers about the 5 things they know to be true in writing, whatever it is that they write for a living. So whether they spend their days writing plays about taxidermists or trying to turn Bohemian Rhapsody into a graphic novel, there are some aspects of their work that are absolutely non-negotiable. Now, today my guest is a first-time novelist whose recent debut, called Mrs. March, blew my head off its hinges. Mrs. March is a character who lives on the very fancy and highbrow Upper East Side of Manhattan. She's married to a successful novelist, she dresses impeccably, and she leads what outwardly seems to be a very stylish and sophisticated life. Beneath the polish, however, she has allowed her anxieties and insecurities to do such a job on her mental state that she is barely able to function like a normal person. And it becomes a question of whether she'll be able to pull back from the edge, or if perhaps this atmosphere of panic and paranoia will take her over it completely. It's also very funny, and for all her troubles, Mrs. March is not a character who arouses much sympathy, which is what I'm hoping our guest can guide us through today. So I'd like to welcome from Madrid to talk about her 5 rules for writing an unlikable character, Virginia Feito. Virginia, welcome.
Hi, and thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Now, you mentioned that the Times described Mrs. March as a gloriously grotesque antiheroine. What are your feelings about her?
She's not very palatable, I have to say. Not a very likable broad, as you British would say. But I love that they describe her as gloriously grotesque. I mean, that sounds like a likable way to be unlikable, I guess, in writing at least.
And did you enjoy writing this character, or was it a little disturbing for you?
Oh, I enjoyed it immensely. I love unlikable characters. I mean, so they fascinate me. I love likable characters as well. I mean, I love, The Sound of Music occasionally, or Disney films, or what have you. But unlikable characters are just. I knew whatever I wrote, it was going to have to go through an unlikable character. It just fascinates me, and how they got to be unlikable, and the different ways that they're unlikable, and why, and the decisions that they make. So,
right. I mean, unlikable characters are fundamental to books, aren't they? If it weren't for unlikable characters, there would be no fiction. I mean, even in, like you said, they mentioned The Sound of Music, but even that's got Nazis in it.
That's
if
true.
It weren't for the unlikables, there wouldn't be many books. There'd be hardly any movies, just a few Disney films, perhaps Lassie. But novelists have for decades been told that their protagonists cannot be unlikable. Why has that been the case?
That's absolutely true. And you were saying all these examples that you were pulling out, Lassie, et cetera. I don't necessarily think an unlikable character has to be a villain. Because in the 5 rules, I hope to be differentiating how, creating maybe more of a simplistic, mustache twirling kind of villain who is just absolutely evil on all counts. Of course, nobody's going to like this person. Versus, just a character that's a bit more morally ambiguous, maybe, who does things and I think that's what really gets on people's nerves. I think people are readers or, critics are maybe more used to the whole, not two-dimensional, because some of them are really complex, but, the very obviously evil, unlikable character, whereas the more morally ambiguous, not Satan, but still extremely grating characters get on people's nerves so much more.
From Strong Words magazine, these are the 5 rules of writing. Okay, so let's have a look at these 5 rules. So this first rule is one that I think, all authors would absolutely agree with. You say you have to read. You just have to read a lot. But you also specify your sort of subclause is that you have to read and watch a lot of unlikable characters. So you have to focus on this kind of on unlikability. And how do you what have you picked up from reading and watching unlikable characters?
I mean, I definitely think, I think any writer will say number one rule for anything is reading a lot and absorbing a lot, watching a lot of, I don't know, art, movies, anything, music, what have you. In this case, for me, and absolutely, this is my disclaimer, by the way, these are all of my, personal rules that apply to me. I have to imbue myself with whatever it is I'm writing about at that moment. So I have to kind of obsess extremely over whatever topic or whatever character I'm writing about and try to absorb a lot of that thing constantly throughout my days, kind of like an umbilical cord. So everything that goes into me is going to go into the book. So even if I were absorbing likable characters, I'd still try to find a way to filter them so that I could twist them around in my writing and make something out of it that I can use.
Mm-hmm. What has really impressed you with unlikability? I mean, it's very paradoxical, isn't it? What liking someone for their unlikability. What aspects of unlikability do you really like?
I mean, it's really obviously it's very subjective. What one person dislikes might not be what another person dislikes, but I do think there is this. I fear there's a tendency now maybe to define unlikable characters, especially unlikable female characters, as this. There's this prototype for gritty, alcoholic female cops with a history of trauma. I feel I think there's a tendency to define these characters as unlikable, which I personally disagree with, because in the end, they tend to just be very troubled, but they're very good human beings at heart. So for me, those aren't the most unlikable characters. For me, I don't know. I think it just has to be unredeemably, morally uncool. I think because it's also very unlikable characters nowadays. I feel like they're always kind of cool, they're messy or they're gritty or they're even no matter how troubled they are, they're just, you can kind of picture them in a photo shoot, through a moorland or, saving someone. So those aren't the qualities that I'm not looking for a hero. I'm looking for just terrible kind of human beings. And, yes, but it might vary.
I mean, those qualities that you describe are very glamorous, aren't they? So
I think so. And so Mrs. March, for example, she's very uncool. She cares a lot. She cares a lot about people's opinions, and that's not cool nowadays. So I was very aware of that. You're not supposed to care what people think. So I'm not supposed to confess that I've, made up this Zoom corner that you're looking at right now, specifically for this call. So that, yeah.
Okay. Now, and then your second rule, you say, don't be afraid. And I think this is a fantastic rule, because there's nothing worse than timidity in writing, I think. So you said, don't be afraid that your characters are too unlikable. Don't be afraid of writing anything in general. You say you're not trying to please your mother here.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you mean about don't be afraid?
I mean, generally writing with fear is always, I think, a terrible idea. I found this to be true, especially when I was writing Mrs. March, which was my first novel. And it was so wonderful because I had nobody in mind. I was just writing for myself. Absolutely. I think deep down in the pit of my stomach, I thought that nobody would ever pick it up. No agent would ever want to represent me. And it would just, I would die alone and penniless in a corner and nobody would read this book. It wouldn't be published. And so that gave me kind of a freedom to write whatever it was, anything. I wasn't afraid of making her too unlikable. I wasn't afraid about maybe poking a little bit at the mental illness theme, which is, could be scary. I wasn't afraid of anything. Now that I'm starting my second one and I can picture, my agent's face. I can picture my editors reading it. I can picture, it makes you kind of afraid. So don't be afraid. Try not to be afraid when you're writing ever. Your art is probably not at its best when it thinks it's being observed. At least I know mine isn't. And, and if it really is too much or it's too disagreeable or it's too whatever, I'm sure somebody down the line will let you know, an agent or an editor. So,
right. I mean, there's a couple of things there. A number of people have said before, you mustn't be afraid. Imagine writing as if no one is ever going to read this. It's a very liberating thing. But are there boundaries? Do you find? In film they say you must never kill a child. No one can come back from that. How do you know where the boundaries might be?
That's interesting. What about Sophie's Choice? I don't know. I don't think you should have them. I don't think that's for the person creating the art. Shouldn't have them if they think that that's what, if they really want to, because it would be so shameful. I think I'd feel very stunted if I felt like, oh no, you can't cross that line. And then of course, all you want to do is cross that line. And I don't, some of the best things that I've read, again, this is very subjective, but I cannot imagine what people said to Bret Easton Ellis when he wrote American Psycho, a book that I love. I love it so much. I think I should probably, get help. But and it's horrible to read, and it's very, very unlikable in general. But for some reason, it fascinates me because I think it's a wonderful work of art. And so it would be such a shame if we lost these because of boundaries. I don't know, and boundaries are so subjective.
Right. I mean, I think, again, that's interesting because I think women like American Psycho a lot more than men do. There's something that women find a lot funnier about American Psycho than men.
I didn't know that. That's so interesting. Maybe it's kind of like the fear of, because if there's going to be a psychopathic serial killer, usually they go after women. So maybe it's something about having control over that narrative because you're reading it and it can't hurt you. I don't know.
I mean, it does go up to 11, doesn't it? American Psycho. It is all sort of pushed absolutely as far as it can go. But how do you get yourself, to take things as, if you come up against something that makes you feel uncomfortable to write, where you do feel afraid, how do you get beyond it?
I'm still struggling with that, to be honest, because there are things that I have a very hard time writing, and nobody's forcing me to do it. But especially, I think the one thing that I'd have a lot of trouble writing would be like an animal torture scene or something like that. I know it's like kill all of the babies, but don't touch the dog. Okay, that's where I get that's like my, to use a very millennial word, trigger. I would have a hard time, but I would want to try it if it scares me so much. I don't know. It's almost a therapy as well. To be honest, I had such a huge cockroach phobia. And I wrote Mrs. March, which is absolutely replete. It's full of cockroaches and very vivid descriptions of my worst nightmare that I had to suffer through in my bathroom for years and years. And it was therapeutic. It was absolutely therapeutic. It got kind of pushed through it. And there was like a rage within me. I hated them. I hated them so much that I kind of got over them a little bit. No, I didn't. I feel like, oh God, is it on me? I feel like it's on me, but it helped. It helped.
And with regard to being afraid, you also said, you're not trying to please your mother here, but that is often a genuine sort of,
I mean, maybe you are
for writers, isn't it? Because at some point your mother, if one still has a mother, is going to read this book.
And again, this is just me. And I have a very special kind of mother. She's very, she's quite old fashioned. She's very conservative. And so I couldn't help, when I wrote the sex scene, her face was like, I could just picture her face reading the scene. And I even talked to her about it a little bit. And she was like, oh, I hate sex scenes. Why do movies and books have to include sex scenes? They're so vulgar. Everybody does it. Why can't you be original? Why do you have to write the sex scene? So, in my case, maybe other people really don't care about their mother's opinion. I did care, but, are you writing for, maybe you are writing for your mother. Again, this is each person to each their own. Maybe you do want to write a lovely book for your mother, and that's super sweet. And I would love to read that, to be honest, and write one for her at some point. But in my case, not the best, because I have a lot of darkness within me that I really want to explore. And so the two don't. And just to be fair, she loved the book. She loved it. So she read it like 1,000 times, and she's the most conservative person that I know. So,
okay. Oh, that's good. And it kind of brings us onto your third rule, because you say, talking about your own darkness that you felt the need to express, you say, admit your own unlikable traits to yourself. This is very, tough sort of auto therapy going on here, isn't it?
That's me.
It can't be gentle, just kind of like I smoke or I don't get sarcasm. You say the ones that are hard to admit, things like I'm selfish or I resent my children or I'm jealous of my friends. And I'm sure there are much, tougher things as well. Tell me about some of the unlikable traits of your own in Mrs. March.
Oh, so many. I mean, and in my defense, I hope that I did blow them out of proportion, but there are things that I hate about myself. And the reason why I think this is a helpful rule is that, well, first of all, if you can look at these, you can analyze these traits and put them into your work, I'm sure that your characters will be much more real to you. And they'll also kind of spur like an anger in you to either defend them or sympathize with them or not at all. In my case, I was kind of punishing myself for a lot of things that I do for all of her social anxiety, for example, and her constant overthinking. And although I haven't thrown like, I think she I don't know what she throws, like a cloth or something on the sofa to like over and over and over again, so that it looks carefree in a natural kind of way. I haven't actually done that, but I probably would. And I'd fan like the magazines out in a certain way. And if people were coming, I'd be, so appearances and things like that, especially with like material possessions and then her obsessiveness and her me. I think I'm very, it's all about me all the time. And I'm very centered on myself and I'm very selfish, I think, but I'm funnier, I hope. And she is. That's something she doesn't have, humor.
No, she doesn't. She's, I feel her just sort of general nervousness about everything forbids any humor to creep in. You have to be a little bit self-aware, I think, to have a sense of humor. And she's
exactly. That's something that's a trait that I really don't like, when people are not self-aware, they're not self-critical, or they're not, can't joke about themselves.
One of my favorite rules of all time about writing is something that George Orwell said, which is that an autobiography is only to be trusted when it reveals something disgraceful, because only then, are people really being truly honest about themselves. That, this process of having to put down on paper, externalize something which is truly sort of shameful or embarrassing. And I think it applies to fiction as well. This is very much admitting your most unlikable traits to yourself. If you're doing something, saying something disgraceful. Did you ever get that far with Mrs. March, do you think?
That's really interesting. But in my case, I think I learned from a very early age that if I was very self-critical or harsh with myself, it was less probable that other people would be. So if I laughed at something that I felt embarrassed about, like, oh, my nose is crooked, or, from a very young age, I think having two older brothers definitely helped in this arena where, if they'd laugh at me for something and I'd laugh back harder. So I think I have a compulsion to be too honest with my faults, maybe as a defense mechanism. So in my autobiography would be crazy. It would be just like everything horrible. I'd be talking about things nobody wants to know, and very personal and very private and very wrong, just as a sort of, just so nobody can laugh at me first. I'll do it first. Because
those are the things that actually, they're the things that people want to know, aren't they? The things that make you most uncomfortable, that you're most embarrassed about, your darkest secrets, as it were. And so when it comes to unlikability, there are sort of likable unlikables, aren't there? The kind of flaws that are appealing to people, but they make you interesting to others. But then there are genuinely unlikable unlikables, things that you do that people might find either disgusting or why should you do that, kind of thing. How do you know the difference? Or
you don't, I think. And I think it really depends. It goes from person to person. I might, defend or explain. I mean, also when you're writing, I think some readers do sympathize with Mrs. March, and all of them usually sympathize with her because I've gone a little bit into her backstory or her history. So I think sometimes the likable unlikables come out when you're explaining how they got to be that way, I suppose. And then people are more willing to be forgiving.
I suppose people feel sort of a bit sorry for her, don't they? Rather than
some do, but I must say, others are just, they're very upset. And wow. Yes, some do, but not that many. And and some, and even professional reviews have kind of found her a little bit too uncharitable. One review said something about how because they're always like, I like unlikable characters, but but this is going too far, or if they're too unlikable, this review was suggesting the reader will lose interest, which I don't agree with at all. No. Personally, I mean, look at Succession. Who hasn't? It's a huge hit. I mean, name one likable character in that.
Quite. But quite. And you also say your rule 4, which I think is so. This is a question of. Your rule is essentially write a character study, you say, which is so you say your character is actually the plot. And I think it's a really good point that it's one thing to have this sort of basket of psychological phenomena, these traits, these flaws, but they've still got to move in a direction, haven't they? They can't just exist like jelly.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that sounds lovely when you describe it that way. But sorry, go on.
No, it's just how do you do it? How do you turn them into action?
Right. For me, I am so fascinated by characters and psychology, and even the most plot heavy works. I don't know, that pops to my head. Game of Thrones, for example. I think there's a lot of it. Its success stems from the characters and the subplots of character arcs developing and spouting from decisions, very, very radically different, contrasting decisions that each different character makes when they're put in a difficult position. I think that's something that absolutely fascinates me. So for me, a character is really secretly the plot. And with Mrs. March, again, a lot of readers were disappointed because they thought they'd be getting into a very, action-packed sort of thriller, or a very kind of mysterious, the ones that we love to read, and I love them as well, but that was never my intention secretly. I just wanted to write a plot where actually it's the characters unraveling and where she's coming from and where she's going and where she kind of ends up. And the mystery is a little bit more about her. Who is she and what her identity is and what she's like and why. And then the thriller was kind of I cheated.
You mean with the thinking that her husband
right
somebody?
She suspects her husband. There's kind of this mystery. Is her husband, gaslighting her? Has he murdered this young woman in Maine, where he happens to go on hunting trips in that exact same area? So, I lied to you all. That was never important.
But it's entirely plausible, isn't it, that she does go off on this kind of lunatic sort of investigative trip, because the whole book is in the head of this very strange, unbalanced woman. And so once you sort of establish that she really is, she's incapable of reining this anxiety in to lead any kind of normal life. So anything is possible, right? So how did you work out this voice, this perspective of this really odd person?
Well, this is going to sound very pretentious because I've only ever written one book, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Yeah. When I write books, whenever I write a novel, the first thing the first thing might be, the idea of it or whatever, but the most important thing is the voice of the book itself. So in this case, it was a very, it's in third person. So it's a narrator. It's not inside her head, literally, but it was I could feel the narration being very prim and very, almost mocking in tone, almost satirical in tone. And that would kind of humiliate this character further. And using, a lot of inspiration from older books and the Highsmiths and the Shirley Jacksons and the way that they used to talk. They talked in a very clipped sort of dialogue, or the books rather were written with dialogues that were very clipped and very economical, language. And I kind of took all of those things and mixed them up. And that was the voice of the book rather than the voice of the character, which sometimes might be the same thing especially if it's first person. But in this case, I don't know if I'm answering your question. I feel like I'm rambling. Steer me back. Steer me back.
Okay. So, but also it kind of connects with your fifth point where you say, mix it up. so having sort of established this, fantastic sort of tone, you say it's really important to think of just as many ways as possible to, you say, how can you use language, character qualities, setting, plot in a way that feels fresher? Because as you also say, unlikable characters, especially women, are very in just now. So as this field becomes more competitive, how can you sort of stay ahead of it by mixing it up?
Right. So find a way. This is, again, a rule for me where, and I wanted to steer clear of being too derivative, of all these works that were inspiring me. As I mentioned, the Patricia Highsmith and with Tom Ripley and Shirley Jackson stories and everything, the Yellow Wallpaper. So I wanted to kind of mix up a little bit. I don't know, either the language felt a little bit too satirical, or I used a lot of descriptive, very graphic, disagreeable, images talking about, I don't know, urine or, pubic hair or violence of blood, and, mix it up. I don't know, to use either language or setting or plot in a way that doesn't feel like you've seen it before. And I use as an example there, Ottessa Moshfegh, one of my most favorite writers. She's kind of the queen of the unlikable character. I mean, if you read any short story Ottessa Moshfegh has ever written, it's just whoa. I mean, she has no fear when she's writing. She writes characters that are absolutely disgusting, and I love them, and I love reading them. And she wrote 2 novels, wholly unique. Eileen and My Year of Rest and Relaxation. They're absolutely different. They differ in mood, that voice that we were talking about. They each feel like you can tell it's the same author behind them, but they're very different in terms of style and tone and setting. One of them is set in the 60s, I believe, and the other one couldn't be, more 2000, and then Twin Towers. I mean, she manages to create darkness and unlikability out of any situation, which I find, I would applaud. And likewise in movies or TV shows, you can see, right, the Breaking Bad or the Successions or the Mare of Easttown. Although, again, going back to the first point, I don't think Mare of Easttown is unlikable, but I think we've fallen into this void of gritty women being unlikable characters because they're.
I haven't seen the Mayor of Easttown because it's on. I think it's on Amazon Prime in this country, and I refuse to have anything to do with Amazon Prime. So I haven't seen it. But
that's a shame.
But you are on board for the movie adaptation of your own book, right? When I spoke to you before, you were down to write the script. So unless anything has changed, presumably you're still doing that. How do you make the character unlikable for a movie? Is it different to writing a novel?
It absolutely is, and because a lot of it depends on the actor playing the character. And in this case, I could not be happier. I can't believe that. And I'm going to call Elizabeth Moss unlikable for a second, but hear me out. It's because I think she is the character, the modern actress that is that loves to transform into someone horrible with most gusto that I've seen in a very long time. Since I know Bette Davis comes to mind, because she's not your average, I don't know, twinkly, and she's a very, very beautiful, very happy sort of person. When I met her on Zoom, I freaked out because I was expecting because all her characters are very intense and they're very dramatic. And, I felt like maybe she would yell and spit would fall out of her mouth and like an eyelash would drop off. But no, she's absolutely lovely. And she's an actress who is very drawn to parts that are very complex and pretty gross a lot of times, and characters that are very unlikable in many ways. And I couldn't be happier. And a lot of it, I think, depends on her. This is my way of getting out of, if the script is an absolute failure and just horrible, it's not my fault. It's Elizabeth Moss's fault.
Well, it's interesting that you should compare her to Bette Davis, because she absolutely is an actress who you rarely see without everything about her saying, every sort of posture she's in, every expression she has, it says, I don't like you. She's just telling people, I don't like you, with every, she doesn't need to say the words. You can just tell that she doesn't like who she's talking to.
Absolutely. And you're not going to like me, I feel like is the...
Yes. So that in itself is really unlikable, isn't it? If you see somebody who just can't stand to look at other people,
absolutely,
you kind of think, well, they're just full of negativity.
Yeah.
And I guess it all goes from there. But so any more news on when this film is likely to appear?
No news, I'm afraid. I'm just happy that I haven't been officially fired yet. So if anything comes up, I will definitely let you know. But no news. I think I'm learning that these things go pretty slowly over there in Hollywood. I mean, it's productions depend on a lot of things and a lot of people and a lot of schedules. And Elizabeth Moss is the most hardworking person ever. If you look at her IMDb, she has like 7 projects going on at once. I don't know how she's going to do it. So I just patiently waiting in my corner.
Even if it's a fraction as good as the book, it's going to be sensational. So best of luck with that. And best of luck with Mrs. March, the book. I hope everybody buys it and it finds the gigantic audience it deserves.
Oh, thank
Virginia,
you so much.
Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. From Strong Words magazine, these are the 5 rules of writing.